A French regent traded his own daughter's body for absolute power, and the court knew exactly what he'd done. I've spent 30 years reading court ledgers, witness depositions, the kind of documents nobody thinks to lie in because they weren't meant for public eyes. What I found in the Orléans archives stopped me cold. It's the summer of 1715 and France is in chaos. King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, is on his deathbed. He's been burning for weeks, literally burning with fever, and everyone at Versailles understands what comes next. A power vacuum the size of a kingdom. Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, is positioned to become regent for the 5-year-old Louis XV. But here's what you need to understand about 1715 France. The nobility doesn't hand power to the second in line out of goodwill. It's seized, traded, sometimes bought with blood. Louis XIV dies on September 1st, 1715. By September 2nd, Philippe has already begun negotiations with the French Parliament to overturn the late king's will and secure his regency. He moves with surgical precision. But there's one obstacle he can't simply remove. The Duke of Maine, Louis XIV illegitimate son, who commands serious loyalty among the old guard. Now Philippe has a daughter. Her name is Elisabeth-Alexandrine. She's 23 years old, intelligent and valuable, which in court politics means disposable. In October 1715, just weeks after Louis XIV's funeral, Philippe arranges her marriage to the Duke of Maine's son, the Duke of Brittany. On the surface, it looks like a political alliance, a reconciliation, the kind of move that steadies a throne. But the witnesses who were there, and I've read their letters, the unsigned ones, the ones meant for confession, they knew something darker was happening. The marriage was consummated almost immediately. Elizabeth became pregnant within weeks. But here's what the court didn't know yet, what Elizabeth herself may not have fully grasped. Her father had made a calculation. By binding his daughter to the Duke of Maine's family through blood, through a grandchild, he'd purchased something infinitely more valuable than a political truce. He'd bought silence, loyalty, and some whispered, a debt that could be called in for anything. By November 1715, Philippe's regency is secure. The Duke of Maine has been neutralized, not destroyed, but brought to heel, and Elizabeth is visibly pregnant. She gives birth to a son in 1716. The child lives only a few weeks before dying of what the court physicians call a weak constitution. I've read the post-mortem notes. They're vague, deliberately vague. In that era, physicians didn't write poison or suffocation. They wrote a failure of the lungs or divine will. But the timing troubles me. The child dies the moment he's no longer politically useful. Once Elizabeth has proven her fertility, once the binding is made, once the debt is owed. Elizabeth survives the birth, but she never fully recovers. She becomes withdrawn, ill frequently. Court observers note her melancholy. Some historians have written it off as postpartum grief, but I wonder if she understood on some level what her father had done, what she'd been used for. Philippe II, meanwhile, rules France for the next 15 years. He consolidates power, reverses Louis XIV policies, shapes an entire nation's trajectory. He becomes one of the most influential men of his generation. And Elizabeth, she lives out her days as the Duchess of Brittany, childless after that first son, her name remembered mainly as a footnote to her father's rise. The question historians still argue about, and I've found no definitive answer in the archives, is whether Philippe deliberately used his daughter as a political tool, knowing exactly what the cost would be, or whether he calculated that she'd bear the price of his ambition and accepted that trade-off as the cost of power. The evidence suggests something in between. Philippe was ruthless, yes, but he wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a man of his time, operating within the logic of a court where children were commodities and women were transactions. What makes this story unsettling isn't that he was uniquely evil. It's that what he did was entirely normal. Elizabeth died in 1744 at age 52. Her death was recorded as from illness. No cause was specified. She left no diary, no letters that survive, no record of what she thought about her father, her marriage, or the son she'd buried decades earlier. History forgot her almost immediately, but the archives don't forget, and neither should we, Because what happened to Elizabeth, the calculated sacrifice of one life for the advancement of another, it's a pattern that repeats throughout history. Kings and queens, generals and politicians, fathers and mothers, they all make the same bargain: power for flesh, ambition for blood. The Regent's unspeakable pact, that's what the court called it in whispers. Whether it was truly unspeakable or simply unspoken, whether it was deliberate sacrifice or calculated ambition, the documents won't tell us. But Elizabeth's life and her son's death, and the silence that followed, those speak louder than any confession ever could. Subscribe for more of these untold stories from the European courts, the ones they buried in the archives, the ones that never made it into the official histories. There's a new scandal every week. Subscribe for more buried stories from the European courts, the ones the historians forgot.